Welcome to my presentation. I did mine on native versus invasive plants and understanding their impact on ecosystems. Start by defining what a native plant is. They're plants which have evolved in a region over thousands of years. They're adapted to local climate, soil, and wildlife. They support native pollinators and animals. They usually make good relationships with each other over time. And yep, that's a native plant. Red Aussie or dogwood is a key native plant. It provides lipid-rich berries which are important for animals to survive our long, cold winters. And it also is important to provide long-lasting energy for migratory birds. It's also great at stabilizing wet soil and stream banks to prevent erosion. An important native plant we have here is Indian grass. It's a really important prairie grass in eastern North America. It has a deep root system that stabilizes soil, stores nutrients and carbon underground, and it also has a very long life cycle, so it can provide these benefits for a long time. An example of a good native species is called the box elder. It's a species of maple. It's a really important pioneer species, usually in floodplains, where it can take over a disturbed area, and it creates room for a lot of longer lived, sort of higher quality species to eventually succeed it. And the picture, that's a picture I took of a box elder flowering. So you'll start to see that pretty soon. So just keep your eye out. They got really cool flowers. So now I'll get into defining an invasive species. They're species that are introduced into an ecosystem that they did not evolve by. They're usually introduced by humans. They lack a lot of the natural predators and diseases that keep them in check back in their homeland. They're capable of spreading aggressively and outcompeting local species. For example, a lot of them will leaf out sooner, or they'll hold on to their leaves longer than our native plants. They don't really follow the natural cycle that they follow. They're a less desirable food source for wildlife because their dietary needs didn't evolve alongside these plants. First example of an invasive species is called alder buckthorn. It grows in wetlands and woodland edges. It usually alters the soil and makes it less desirable for other plants. The berries have been shown to have poor nutritional value for our local wildlife because they're too high in sugar. They're in the same family as European buckthorn, which I want to talk about later, and they share a lot of similar properties. So alder buckthorn grows a lot around here, so I wanted to teach you guys how to identify it real quick. You can see it has this light brown fuzzy bud, and it's naked, meaning it doesn't have any scales protecting it, so it's just exposed to the air. And then the leaf on the right has a symmetrical venation pattern, and the margins are smooth, meaning the edge of the leaf is smooth. See on the left, that's the trunk of the tree. That looks like a pretty old one, but it usually forms multiple stems like that at the base, and it has kind of like white tannish spots on the bark. And then on the right is the fruit and the leaf. It has black fruits, sometimes they're red, and you can see the leaves are really glossy. An invasive plant I want to talk about is Oriental bittersweet. This one's a vine, and it climbs up trees by just simply wrapping around them extremely tight, and that's its vining habit. And this eventually girdles the tree, which kills them. It can also pull them down due to all the extra weight of the vines on the tree. You can see in the picture here, right in the middle, it looks like a small tree that got pulled down. And then the top of that maple, you can see it has a lot of scarring and girdling. I'm not sure if you can make that out, but so that tree's gonna die. So this is an example of an area where just bittersweet was left to take over and kind of ruined it. And eventually it will just kill everything, and then it'll just start vining on itself on the ground and form this little thicket, which is extremely inefficient. Its fruit production at that point will start to slow down, and the whole ecosystem just becomes really poor. My third example I'm going to use as an invasive is Japanese barberry. This is a plant that has extremely sharp thorns. It has those red berries on it. It's kind of more of a bramble where it just kind of shoots out of the ground at first as like a single stem. And it starts to form thickets, and studies have shown that these are an optimal climate for ticks, and that tick populations double underneath these plants. But on the bright side, the root has a cool natural antibiotic property, and you can eat the berries. So to give a specific example of how invasives harm wildlife, I want to talk about European buckthorn. This is in the same family as the alder buckthorn I talked about earlier, and they both share the same effect. So the berries contain amodin, which is a laxative, and this effect increases the viable seeds dispersed because they're passed through the gut much quicker. And unfortunately, this harms wildlife due to the laxative effect, causing dehydration and malnutrition. And on top of this, the seeds germinate very readily and will form dense thickets, which will take over an area. And this will make this one of the only food sources for wildlife, which will further jeopardize their health. So to touch on some of the positives of invasive plants, they can fill in extremely degraded ecosystems. For example, the Siberian elm was planted to help with the Dust Bowl due to its ability to grow in extremely poor soil, and they used it as a windbreak. But unfortunately, it was able to spread all across North America after this, and it naturalized itself into our ecosystems where it crowds out a lot of our more desirable native plants. And on top of that, it's extremely hard to kill. So to sum up the impacts of invasive plants, they shade out natural regeneration and form monocultures. They don't meet the dietary needs of a lot of wildlife. They provide an unnatural amount of cover for a lot of pests and prey animals, and it prevents predators from being able to do their job and keep the ecosystem in check. So to sum up the benefits of native plants, I'd say they provide optimal nutrition for their local wildlife because both organisms evolved side by side. They have good relationships with each other, and they're good at coexisting with one another. This creates biodiversity and ecosystem resilience on top of better energy production. They support an abundance of bugs, birds, and other animals. For example, the National Audubon Society observed 95 different birds species feeding on dogwoods alone.